like there's always the overarching generalization of moms tend to impart these traits when they're raising children, and fathers tend to impart like these other traits. And I was listening to what was the guy's name? It was a child development psychologist. He was on Jordan Peterson's podcast, and I listened to it like a year ago, and he had a whole spiel about like the different roles that they play. And while that's true, you can also work within, like, those aren't rigid, which is where society's saying, we don't need to adhere to traditional gender norms, like, has merit. Like, both sides have merit. And I think it's important to recognize each of those in your own relationships. For like when we were texting about the grocery store methods, like, you take some and you shelve other ones, like. And so I think people have, so the acceptance movements, this is the problem that I have with a lot of the tribalism stuff. It's like the acceptance movements have a lot of merit generally. Like, if you want to take from a broader societal perspective, like, well, I'll use gay marriage as an example. Like, I think they should be allowed to be married. I don't care. It doesn't matter to me at all. It doesn't affect my life if two people who are gay go get married. It doesn't matter to me. But there's still like a traditional sort of gender role where you're like, where like conservative people are like, that's not, marriage is supposed to be between man and women. And I think both can be true, right? You can have the conservative people say, you know what, I don't care that they're doing that over there. And then you can have these people say, yeah, maybe, but also this is how we're choosing to live. And I think both can be true at the same time, and we don't have to pick one or the other. And that's where the tribalism gets very irritating to me. I'm not sure I'm articulating this nuance very well, but like,
No, I think I'm
does
putting.
that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Because ultimately, your life is your life. You can't. And I think it's kind of what we were talking about too, having the patience as a human being to at least listen to someone's story and understand that there are nuances in everyone's life. Like, I only know what it's like to be Zachary Gaudlip. I don't know what it's like to be Eric Jennings. I don't have your experience, your life. I don't know what you've lived through. So I can only speak from my perspective, but I can also have patience enough to listen to your perspective and say, oh, okay, now I understand you a little bit more. We may not agree on everything, and I can guarantee we don't agree on everything, but that's okay. We can still be friends. We can still do business together. We could still do anything together. We can play soccer together. We could do anything, even though we don't agree on everything. And that's where I think a lot of people is, like you said, the tribalism, and there is a toxicity in tribalism of, okay, this person thinks that, oh, well, then I can never be friends with them. Like, take, for instance, even a vote. You're not allowed to vote in primary elections if you're an independent. Why is that?
Yeah, it makes no sense.
You know what I mean? Like, why are you forcing us to pick a side?
Yeah.
That goes against the Constitution, in my opinion, and against what the founding fathers had as an idea. It doesn't make sense to say, okay, well, if you can still vote whatever you want, but they're literally forcing you to pick a side and say, okay, are you going to be a D or an R? Are you going to be red or blue? And then unless you do that, unless you can, agree to those terms and conditions, you're not allowed to vote in a primary it's the primary.
Yeah.
Right? The first one, the first election.
It's the primary.
Yeah, the primaries. So you're not allowed to vote in those unless you pick a side? That doesn't make any sense. Why?
No,
why should we have to
doesn't.
pick a side?
Yeah, no, I agree. I want to expand on the thing about being friends or not being friends. It's past that, and in my opinion anyways, it's past that part. It's the fact that there's so many things. So, all right, I'm gonna try and take this apart. There's like 4 like avenues of things. The first is that there's so many things in the world, and everyone feels like they have to have an opinion, so it's easier just to pick the checklist of one of them. And so that creates a situation in which in which the thought required to actually solve a lot of these issues does not take place. Like, these issues are very, very complex, a lot of them. Some not so much, but others are very complex, and they require a lot of thinking past first order, right? You have first order, then second order, third order consequences, like all the way down the list, right? You have all the things to consider. The second is that because that's the case, it's easier to avoid the conversation with somebody who doesn't agree. So that's to your friend point, but it's not, that's like a symptom of where we are rather than, I think, people. Because if you talk to somebody and you don't know their politics, you're going to treat them like most people, just be cordial and it'll be fine. So the
And at the same
basic,
time, that doesn't solve anything.
correct, but the basic decency is where the ground floor has to be. Like if we don't have the basic decency at all, then we can't go anywhere, because then you're not having the conversation in good faith. So that's the third one. You have to have the conversation in good faith that you're like, that both people are trying to solve the problem. Because if one person thinks the other person isn't being genuine or doesn't actually want to solve the problem or whatever, you're not going to get anywhere. And then the fourth thing is, I don't know, kind of compounds them all, but people have to, and this kind of goes to what we talked about earlier about just giving the information and letting people decide what they want rather than picking and choosing what information is disseminated. There's no time for a lot of people to really think about these things. And so that cycles back to the first one, the checklist problem. Because they don't have the time to think about the things, it's just easier to like be informed and have like a semi opinion based on what some guy said on something.
Yeah, give me your elevator speech. What's your sell? What's your point?
For what? Oh yeah. No,
like
exactly.
that's the mentality. It's like, give me your elevator speech. What's the point that you're trying to make? I got things to do. I gotta go do something.
Yeah, and none of these issues are elevator speech issues. You cannot solve any of them that way. Like even just taking the family thing that you mentioned, right? We don't really know. I'm sure there's studies that people can pull out to say, okay, my way's right or my way's right. I'm sure there's studies, because that's how there's so many studies now. I feel like for a lot of things, and somebody who's in academia is, please come in the comments and be like, Eric, you're full of shit. Like there's actually this, like, fine. I don't know. But based on what I've seen, the family issue, like we don't know exactly, like we know traditionally that the nuclear family unit seems to have worked, right, throughout history. It's gotten us to here.
Yeah.
We don't know really if other sorts of family units will work, whether it's 2 men, 2 women, etc. Like we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because you can have like 2 women and they can still espouse the same or similar traits in raising a child, and then maybe a male influence comes from a coach or something. Like we don't know, right? Because every single, like, you're not going to have one kid raised the exact same way ever.
Yeah.
There's because the personalities of the parents can be so different. So you can have 2 men and then with one kid, and you can have 2 men with another kid over there, and they could turn out to be totally different. And you have no, like, it's so hard to control for that I think we really have no idea. And so that's why for me it comes down to, like, if you do the best that you can do, then that's all we can really ask for. Because like these blanket sort of these blanket statements, I don't think are conducive to being productive, I guess. Like there's so many things going on in the world that it's so hard to just generalize things, because there's so many nuances now, because everyone has like 50 years ago, you grew up in a small town. It's like let's say like a coal mining town in Appalachia. Like you're probably gonna grow up, go to school, work in the coal mines. Maybe you'll go to college and do something else, and then like that'll be your life, because the options don't really exist.
Yeah, your sphere of influence is very small as
Right.
well.
Now, everyone's sphere of influence in the Western world, anyways, is the entire world. And the way to like delineate and break down the data, like the cross section, is so deep now that it's almost impossible to just say like one thing is better than the other, because well, what if you put, I don't know, I'm rambling a bit, but like hopefully that makes sense.
No,
But
I
but
appreciate the ramble.
but on the flip side of that, there are general rules I think that each individual can portray on. For example, right, you can just be respectful of other people, like things like that. Those are the general rules that have to still exist. But the other stuff, like
Yeah, like you think masculine, feminine energies.
mhm,
I've heard a lot of people talk about that, where certain women are more masculine than some men.
mhm,
And I think that's where the natural order of things is really important, where it's not necessarily that, like you were saying, how even roles as parents can be fluid, a little bit fluid. Like the man could say cook, or the woman,
mhm,
like it can work. Like there are plenty of relationships that works great. And I think what it comes down to is an energy balance of both.
mhm,
The yin and yang, the however you want to word it, masculine, feminine energies that come together, and how we work together, regardless of who carries those roles. I just think that traditionally, and like I said, on a broad scale, on like if you were to take the whole world and delineate it into like one study, it would say that men should be, or are usually more masculine. The woman is
mhm.
typically more feminine. But there's, like you said, there's a lot of nuances. There's a individual basis that you can't say that's in every case. Of course not. To me, it just comes down to more the energy balance of who's
Sure.
providing, the nurturing side, and who's
Mhm,
providing kind of the discipline, or more,
mhm.
uh, you know, pick
No,
yourself up
that's
and
what
be
it is.
tough and be
The
strong.
discipline side. Yeah.
Right.
That's what it is. And but you are still right. So that's I guess the point I was trying to make was like the generalities can be right, but people have to figure out what works best for them. Because someone will
And the
say it,
nuances are right.
right. Someone will say a general statement, and then the response will often be like, "Well, that doesn't apply to me." It's like, well, that's fine. It doesn't have to.